Let's just look at the calendar for a second, because the date today, it matters a lot. It's January 18th, 2026. That means we are exactly 2 weeks away from February 1st.
And February 1st is not just another day on the calendar anymore.
No. If you've been watching the wires this morning, you know it's starting to look like the edge of a cliff.
It really feels like the calm before a very specific and very loud storm. The timeline is just incredibly tight.
Right.
Usually these geopolitical shifts, they happen over years. A slow erosion. This is happening in days.
It's a sprint, a full-on sprint to a crisis. So, okay, here's the mission for this deep dive. We're looking at a stack of sources that outline what might be the single most aggressive move by the U.S. against its own allies since, the Suez Crisis.
Oh, easily. Back in the 50s.
On the surface, the headlines are all screaming about trade, tariffs, import taxes, the usual economic friction.
Which is so misleading. If you only read the financial pages, you'd think this is about car subsidies or, steel dumping.
Exactly. But the sources we have today tell a much, much darker story. This isn't about trade deficits at all.
No.
This is an economic siege, and it's designed to force a massive real estate transaction, specifically the sale of the world's largest island,
Greenland, to the United States.
And because the current owners, Denmark, said no, we are now watching the mechanisms of the Western alliance turn inward and, start tearing themselves apart.
It's the weaponization of the American economy, plain and simple, using it against the European economy to secure territory. That's the core of it.
Let's get into the mechanics of this pressure campaign first, because the what is just staggering.
It is.
The White House has announced that starting February 1st, again, 14 days from now, a blanket 10% tariff is going to hit all goods from 8 specific European nations.
And the list itself is. It's surgical. It's not the entire EU. It's a hit list, and it's designed for maximum leverage.
It really is. You've got the Nordic bloc, so Denmark, obviously, since they hold the deed to Greenland. Then Norway, Sweden, Finland. That's the Arctic Council members, so that makes a certain amount of sense geographically.
It does. But then you get to the heavy hitters.
The UK, France, Germany, and the Netherlands.
The Netherlands. That's the detail that keeps jumping out at me.
Because of Rotterdam.
Precisely. If you really want to hurt the European economy, you don't just target the factories in Germany or, the financial services in London. You target the logistics.
You go for the arteries.
You go for the arteries. Rotterdam is the entry point for American goods into Europe and the exit point for European goods to the world. So by slapping tariffs on Dutch logistics, you are essentially clogging the entire continent's trade.
And then you add Germany and France on top of that. The economic engines. We are not talking about small change here.
No.
I was running the numbers on the trade volume. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. A 10% tariff on German machinery or, say, French aerospace parts isn't just a tax. It's a supply chain disruptor.
Oh, absolutely. It stops production lines in Ohio just as fast as it stops them in Bavaria.
And that's the gamble, isn't it? The U.S. administration is betting that the European pain tolerance is lower than the American one.
But the 10%, that isn't even the real threat. That's just the warning shot.
It's like the boiling frog approach, except they've just cranked the heat up instantly. The sources all point to a second date. June 1st.
The ultimatum.
Yes, the ultimatum.
And it is explicit. It's not implied. If a deal for the transfer of sovereignty over Greenland isn't reached by June 1st, those tariffs jump from 10% to 25%.
And 25%. That's the nuclear option in trade.
It is prohibitive. At 10%, companies, they eat into their margins, they complain, they lobby, maybe prices go up a little bit at Walmart. At 25%, entire business models just collapse.
You can't operate.
You cannot import a Volkswagen or a specialized MRI machine from Siemens with a 25% markup and stay competitive. It effectively severs the trade relationship. It's an economic gun to the head of America's closest allies.
And the condition to lower that gun isn't lower your emissions or stop subsidizing Airbus.
No.
It is sell us the territory.
Which brings us to the core conflict. Why? Why does the U.S. want Greenland so badly that they are willing to risk a global depression to get it? We all know about the resources, right? The rare earth elements, the uranium deposits.
It's definitely about resources, but looking at the strategic analysis in our stack here, it feels more about the map itself, the whole unsinkable aircraft carrier theory.
It's the GIUK, Gap, Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom. Control Greenland, you control the gateway between the Arctic and the Atlantic. For decades, that was a NATO responsibility, a shared one.
But the U.S. argument now seems to be that shared responsibility just isn't enough anymore.
Yeah, and the White House rationale is specifically citing the threat of China and Russia. The argument they're making is, if we don't buy it, Beijing or Moscow will eventually take it, or at least influence it to the point where we lose control.
Which is a classic preemptive argument.
It is, but I think we need to challenge that logic, or at least point out the flaw that the sources highlight.
You mean the fact that neither China nor Russia has actually made a claim on it?
Exactly. There is no Chinese fleet steaming towards Nuuk. There is no Russian claim filed at the UN. The threat is entirely theoretical.
So the U.S. is reacting to a potential future scenario.
By initiating an actual conflict with its own allies today.
It's a paradox. To save the West from external influence, the U.S. is attacking the foundational pillars of the West. It feels like this administration has just decided that the whole alliance system is obsolete.
And that direct ownership is the only real security guarantee that matters anymore.
And that shift in thinking from allies expand our power to allies are obstacles to our power. That's what makes this so incredibly dangerous.
And clearly the Europeans have realized this isn't a bluff. They aren't just sending lawyers to the WTO.
No, not at all. And this is where the story shifts from, say, economic crisis to military standoff.
Yes.
I want to talk about the response, because it is not just diplomatic cables. It's kinetic. The sources are detailing a mobilization of European forces to Greenland.
This is the part that should terrify anyone who understands military operations. We are not talking about a joint exercise.
No.
Denmark has invoked mutual defense clauses within the European framework, not NATO, notably, but European solidarity. And you've got Danish frigates deploying. There are reports of British and French naval assets moving into the North Atlantic to support them.
Just visualize that for a moment.
Yeah.
You have the U.S. Navy, which considers the North Atlantic its backyard, and now you have the Royal Navy and the French Navy deploying to that same zone, not to work with the U.S., but to actively block a U.S. coerced acquisition.
It creates an absolute nightmare scenario for the commanders on the ground. What are the rules of engagement?
I don't know.
If a U.S. destroyer tries to enter the territorial waters of Greenland to, say, survey a port, and a Danish frigate blocks its path, who blinks?
It's like a Tom Clancy novel, but everyone is supposed to be on the same team, or they used to be.
And think about the intelligence sharing. These ships, they use the same data links. They use Link 16. They literally see each other on their screens as friendlies.
And now what?
Now, suddenly, the political leadership is saying, treat that friendly as a hostile. The potential for a miscalculation, a collision, a warning shot that goes wrong is just astronomically high.
And it isn't just about the hardware. It's about the people. The sources mention protests breaking out in two key cities, Copenhagen and Nuuk.
The protests in Nuuk are particularly significant. I mean, Nuuk is a small capital, maybe 19,000 people.
Right.
If you have thousands of people in the streets there, that's basically the entire population mobilizing.
It puts a very human face on this real estate deal. These are people watching the news, seeing the U.S. president threaten to bankrupt their protectors in Europe unless they are sold off like property.
The atmosphere must be incredibly volatile.
It has to be.
And it creates a legitimacy crisis. Even if the Danish government wanted to sell, which they clearly do not, they couldn't do it now, their own government would collapse. The public anger in Scandinavia is at a boiling point. The U.S. has effectively united the European public against American policy in a way the Soviet Union never could.
Which brings us to the so what? The big picture here. The sources are using a phrase that honestly I never thought I would see in a serious intelligence assessment.
The collapse of NATO.
The collapse of NATO. It's not hyperbole anymore, is it?
Not at all. Think about the structure of NATO. Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all.
But the aggressor here is the primary guarantor of the alliance.
Exactly. If the U.S. is using economic warfare and threatening, implicit military coercion against Denmark, Germany, and the U.K., does Article 5 even apply?
But technically, NATO isn't triggered by tariffs.
Technically, no. But spiritually, the alliance is dead if the members don't trust the leader.
It just turns the whole alliance into a protection racket. Nice economy you have there, Germany. Be ashamed if something happened to it. Because you wouldn't help us seize territory.
That is the transactional view. And if you are, say, Poland or Estonia or Lithuania right now, you are watching this with absolute horror.
Because if the U.S. will treat the UK and Germany this way, what chance do the Baltic states have?
Correct. If the special relationship with the UK doesn't protect London from being targeted as an economic enemy, then the security guarantees for Eastern Europe are basically worthless. And I'm sitting in Warsaw, I'm thinking, I need my own nukes. I need my own army. I cannot rely on Washington.
And that triggers a massive rearmament across Europe, completely independent of the U.S.
It fractures the West into competing blocs. You could have the Anglosphere splitting, with the UK forced to choose between its economic survival in Europe and its historical ties to the U.S.
And the U.S. isolates itself into a fortress, America, controlling the hemisphere but losing the world.
And we haven't even mentioned who benefits from all this chaos.
China and Russia.
They don't have to do a single thing. They just sit back and watch. The whole U.S. justification was to protect Greenland from them.
Right.
But in doing so, the U.S. is dismantling the only structure, NATO, that actually contained Russian and Chinese ambition on a global scale. It is a strategic own goal of historic proportions.
It reminds me of that Suez crisis I mentioned earlier. In '56, the U.S. forced the U.K. and France to back down to avoid a wider war. And that really signaled the end of the British Empire. This feels like the inverse. The U.S. is the one pushing.
And Europe is digging in. But the result might be the same. The end of an era. If June 1st comes and those 25% tariffs hit, the global economy fractures. We go back to mercantilism, every nation for itself.
The timeline is what keeps me up at night. 14 days until the initial pain starts, then 4 months of escalating tension until the explosion.
And in those 4 months, you have troops staring at each other in the Arctic twilight. The margin for error is zero.
Okay, so let's just recap the immediate situation for everyone listening. Today is January 18th. On February 1st, the U.S. initiates a 10% tariff on the U.K., France, Germany, the Netherlands, and the entire Nordic bloc.
A direct punishment for refusing to negotiate the sale of Greenland.
At the same time, European troops are deploying to nuke and the surrounding waters to assert sovereignty.
And all the while, the clock is ticking down to June 1st, where the economic penalty triples. It is a game of chicken between the world's two largest economic powers.
With a military standoff happening in the background, it's terrifying. And it completely reframes how we have to understand global politics. I mean, we grew up in a world where the West was a given, a solid bloc.
Now it looks like a negotiation or a hostile takeover.
Right. We're going to be tracking the troop movements and the market reaction every single day as we get closer to February 1st. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a thought that came up while I was reading through the diplomatic cables in the source stack.
What's that?
We talk about alliances like they're friendships. But looking at this, if the United States is willing to leverage the economic destruction of its closest friends, the people who fought alongside them for 80 years, just to acquire a strategic asset, does the concept of a Western alliance actually exist anymore?
Or have we already entered a new age?
An age where there are no allies, only transactions. And if that's the case, who's next on the list?
That is the question that will define the next 50 years of history.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back with an update as soon as that February 1st deadline hits. Stay safe.